Reserve. The root of all our evil, it begins with the Federal Reserve. Hey, yeah, well, let's go back in time when everybody was so proud of America.
I'm Tommy Salmons. This is Year Zero. Today, Patrick MacFarlane of Liberty Weekly joins me. This is probably the second or third time I've had Patrick on the show. Patrick is a podcaster with me at the Libertarian Institute, and we really enjoy our chances to get together and chat. Today, we decided we were going to talk about MK Ultra and eugenics and how these different operations of the CIA have been carried over into modern day, how they've used the lessons they've learned from the operations and the projects in order to kind of shape the way that discourse has taken place in the United States in order to benefit the elites and the establishment. But first, RyanBunting.com. For all of your graphic design needs, go to RyanBunting.com. Ryan Bunting is a great libertarian and a great anarcho-capitalist. He's also a great graphic designer. He designed my podcast logo and helped Top Lobster in designing the t-shirt you can get at the libertarianinstitute.org. So go to the libertarianinstitute.org to get Year Zero t-shirts and mugs and stickers and whatever else. But back to Ryan Bunting. He wrote a fiction novel a while back, and it was really good. It's called Project Manicore. You should check it out. You can get it at his website, ryanbunting.com. Now, back to the Libertarian Institute. Libertarianinstitute.org, you'll find a bunch of podcasters. Me, Keith Knight, Patrick MacFarlane, Kyle Anzalone, Scott Horton, all doing great podcasts, having great conversations, and informing the public. But also, you'll find a lot of articles written by some of your favorites. Jim Bovard, Ron Paul, Sheldon Richman, all right at the Libertarian Institute. So, you got to come over to the libertarianinstitute.org and check us out. And don't forget to donate. Speaking of donate, you like what I did there? I did that on purpose. I thought it was funny. Don't forget to check out my Patreon or my Substack. You can go over there. You can donate. You can also go to my PayPal. All the links are in the show notes. So, if you feel like I'm bringing forth a product worth paying for, shoot me a couple of bucks, man. A couple of dollars a month. That will really help all of us out. Get us to a position where we can do this full time eventually. And that's what we're all looking for. I'm also writing some novels and some fiction. So be on the lookout for all that coming out. I'll definitely be talking about that here. But before we get into the show, one of the major things I really want to talk about is with the tyrannical government that we've been dealing with for the last 2 years under COVID, it's very important that you start sharing these podcasts. Whether you share my podcast, you share Dave Smith's podcast, Ryan Bunting's, not Ryan Bunting. Ryan Bunting doesn't have a podcast. That shit would suck. Timeline Earth, Pete Quinones, Patrick MacFarlane, Kyle Anzalone, Keith Knight, Scott Horton. Share all our podcasts and really just get the word out there, because we're really working hard to put forth like useful information and talk to the audience in a way that they can understand. And we're doing a lot of the work, so you don't have to. There's that old cliche. Figure I might as well throw it in there. Also, go and to all of our iTunes, just give us a 5-star rating, like us, push us up on the stats. So the more that this information gets out there, the better off we are. So share the podcast with anybody that you think might be interested in the conversations. I get a lot of messages telling me how great the conversations are, and I'm hoping all those people are sharing the podcast. But if you're not sharing the podcast and you think the conversations are great, take the time to send the podcast to somebody else. As much as I like to get the feedback that I'm doing a good job and that you're really enjoying the information, I would much rather free more people from this mental prison, this panopticon that we are all stuck in at the moment. And the more people that we free, the better off we are in the future. So, without further ado, thank you, Tom Burton, for the music. Enjoy the show. Okay, I am here with Mr. Patrick MacFarlane from the Libertarian Institute, one of my brothers from another mother. What's going on, dude?
Hey, not much, man. Glad to be with you.
Yeah, man. Well, I heard that interview you did with Adam Fitzgerald. I'm gonna have to get that guy on. That was really interesting. A lot of the stuff y'all were talking about reminded me of that documentary that couple made, Minds of Men. I can't remember the name of the couple. But yeah, y'all were covering a lot of that stuff and a lot of stuff that I've been interested in for a long time. So I want to kind of chat about that a little bit. And some of the stuff that you were talking about when it came to the Manhattan Project sounded pretty interesting too. So let's get into some of that. So
Oh yeah, that's solid. That's Dan and Melissa Dykes. I think.
Yes, the Dykes. Yes, thank you.
True Stream Media.
Yes, that was a really good documentary. That was what, 3 years ago they made that.
Yeah, they have some really interesting stuff, man. Like I follow them on. I think they're still on YouTube, but I follow them on Odyssey. They have and she, like, Melissa just does that free, like, stream of consciousness kind of video, and everything she does is like on point. Yeah. And then I think Dan, like, he makes some graphics to it and stuff like that. It's just, they're good.
Yeah, they're very good. I really enjoy them. I don't watch everything that they do. Like, I mean, I don't listen to every podcast I want to listen to either.
Yeah.
I just have so much other stuff going on, and I'm trying to, do my thing as well. And if I paid attention to everybody else, I'd never do anything. So, sometimes you got to cut your losses.
Yeah, it's tough, bro. It is.
But the MK Ultra, y'all got into that, and y'all were talking about that quite a bit, and I learned quite a bit about it. Now, like, he didn't get near into the people involved like I did. Now, I did episode. I'm going to pull up Word right now because I did an episode a couple of years ago, and it was specifically talking about this one guy. And let me see if I can find the document here because I got it all typed up.
Well, one good thing that Adam is really good at this, and he has an encyclopedic knowledge, it seems like, of this, but a lot of this seems very extravagant, like pretty far-fetched, like Alex Jones stuff, especially when it comes to mind control and that kind of topic specifically. But all these documents were brought forward in like a congressional inquest. So it's not just pulling it out of our ass or anything like that.
Right. Yeah. And there was this doctor in Canada, Dr. Cameron Hewitt, I think was his last name. I'm having trouble finding it for some reason. But he was no, that wasn't him. I don't remember. His first name was Cameron. Anyway, he was a psychologist up in Canada, and he was doing a lot of these tests, and he was doing a lot of the electroshock therapy to the brain, he was the one who was in charge of the project to erase brains and then implant new memories and he was doing this in mental hospitals, and he was being funded by the CIA through the University of Toronto, I think it was. Like I said, for some reason, I can't find my notes. I don't know if I had them on a different computer. I thought it was on this one, but it might have been a different one. But yeah, they did I came onto him. There was an Amazon I want to say it was an Amazon movie. Let's see, there that where they were talking about him, and I was like, wow, this guy's kind of like out there. I don't remember if it was a documentary or a movie, but his name came up, so I started looking into him, and I ended up doing like a 2 hour episode, just me talking about this guy and the experiments he was doing and stuff like that. And it was crazy, man. Some of the stuff they did during that time was really nuts.
Yeah, and it's the problem that you run into is that once you start looking into these things, because of course the reason right now that I'm looking into like government medical experimentation is obviously because I'm suspicious of the COVID-19 vaccine. Right. I mean, I'd be looking into this shit anyways, regardless, but I think that there's something that happens where it gives speculation more credence to be like, hey, there's something nefarious about this vaccine. It gives that speculation more credence when you can be like, hey, all this shit has happened in the past and it's been covered up. And the government has been doing these things behind our backs. And therefore, it's more likely that there's something nefarious up with this vaccine. Now, it's not the specific work that some people like maybe Whitney Webb are doing. But it's speculation for sure. But if you can get normal people to listen to you, then it kind of justifies why I'm suspicious.
Yeah. Hewan Cameron, Dr. Hewan Cameron. So Cameron was his last name. So,
oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is like more specifically to MK Ultra. We know this because of the church committee. And this was kind of happening at a time when, President Ford was around, but after Nixon was impeached, and people were very suspicious because he was so shady. Mm-hmm. Well,
and the thing that you run into, man, when you start looking into MK Ultra or these things that they were doing in the 60s and 70s, is one of the things I've run into. Are the people are so interesting that were involved. Like he brought up Bill Donovan on your show. Well, Wild Bill Donovan he was a nut job, man. They called him Wild Bill for a reason. Like this dude was like crazy. He had this quote, something along the lines of, I get to plunder, kill, and something else and steal while the government pays me to do it. I get to do it legally and the government pays me to do it, or something like that. Like this guy was like a lunatic. And then I have a book up here on James Jesus Angleton called The Ghost, which he was really interesting. He was actually like a poet and into poetry, and like, or you look at like Sidney Gottlieb, right? Where Sidney Gottlieb was a hippie who was just really good at science and like got involved. And then as soon as he retired from the CIA, he went back and lived as a hippie. You know, it was like, he's like peace, love, and happiness all over the place after he had been torturing people with chemicals and all this stuff for years. You know, so the people that what you would call the disconnection or what did they call it? Where they would
the cognitive dissonance?
No, it was the way they put it was you had to Adam Fitzgerald was describing it on your podcast too, whenever he was talking about, well, you would have different teams doing different things, right?
Oh, the compartmentalization.
Compartmentalization. Thank you. I knew that the word was there. I just couldn't remember it. That's why I'm such a great writer. But
you are a great writer too.
so like they compartmentalize this, and it was like it not only happened within the CIA or within these bureaucracies, it was also happening within the individuals. They were having to compartmentalize the different natures of their humanity in order to do these wild things. And when you start reading on these people, you start seeing their human side. You know, I mean, like Sidney Gottlieb, he was he was married for like 45 years or something like that. Like he was a guy, you know, he had a wife that he loved and he cared for. And when he retired, they went and traveled the world, you know, and like went and lived in the Amazon for like a year and shit like that. And you're like, wow, man, like what would cause that kind of like separation? You know, it almost makes you think these people are voluntarily schizophrenic.
Yeah, and I mean, if you want to get really conspiratorial, I've been looking in, and I asked Adam about this, but I don't think I put it in the episode.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this thing, you know, if you get really into, it's like Pizzagate adjacent, where if you go on like Odyssey, you can find videos about Project Monarch. Have you heard of this ever? The Monarch mind control stuff.
Yeah,
and so I have not seen documents like the CIA MK Ultra documents that would support anything called Project Monarch, or to be clear, it's speculation. But what they talk about is using drugs and ritual abuse and torture to fragment the personality so that the subject is someone that can be controlled like a remote. But, you know, then again, Fitzgerald was talking about how the CIA was experimenting with, he mentioned mind-controlled dogs, that they literally claimed that they could put a node in a dog's head and mind control that dog and make them run around.
Well, there was one scientist, I think he was South American, and I can't remember what his name was, but he actually did this with a bull, right?
Right.
So
yeah,
it was a bullfight, and he turned it off, and like the bull just kind of stopped and was like, whatever, you know, like just kind of sat there, you know. So like, yeah, they were doing some crazy shit like that, like where they were jacking with the electrical currents of the mind so that they could, you know, force people to, or force animals. I can't say it was people, but they were forcing animals to be aggressive or less aggressive, and they were doing that, and they were doing it with a flick of a switch, you know. So I do know that was happening. I don't know what they were trying to accomplish, other than I guess trying to figure out how the brain worked, how different electrical currents operated within the brain. So I don't know if they ever utilized that in any other way. But I mean, there were projects back then. They were doing things like, I know they believed, and I don't know, you know, it's hard because a lot of this stuff, it's hard to find, because you're like, okay, I know you were doing this. I've like seen, like I've like read people say, oh, one of the things we were looking at was yada, 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 but never find anybody like expounding on it, or, you know, any documents on it. So it's kind of hard to trace all this stuff that was going on. And then as Adam Fitzgerald pointed out, so many of these documents were destroyed. And it, like MK Ultra was only discovered because they discovered a money trail. It was all discovered through accounting. It wasn't even through like Freedom of Information Act. It was when the church committee got together and they were investigating the finances of the CIA, they ran into the Project MK Ultra, and it was like, oh, well, shit, what's all this money for? We don't see any documents on this. So they had to start coming clean on some of the stuff that was going on, and then some of it was, for some reason, you can speculate all you want. Some reason, some of it was wrapped up and has been released with JFK documents, right?
Oh, yeah.
So you get little pieces here and there. So, you know, and then there's the whole Whitey Bulger case. And I mean, there's belief, and I think there's evidence, and I'd have to relook. I think I've looked before, but I'd have to look again, that Ted Kaczynski was actually a subject in the MK Ultra project, and there were different experiments going on with him. I've also heard Timothy McVeigh was wrapped up in it somehow.
Yeah.
So they were doing things to people. I mean, you can look at like Frank Olson. There was that really great documentary that came out a while back on Frank Olson that his son actually produced and directed. And
Was he the guy that fell from the building or something?
Yes, the scientist that worked with the CIA. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like there's a lot of evidence out there. And it's just putting it all together, and like you're connecting dots that you don't actually have like connections for, because it jumps because of everything that was, destroyed. You only have like fragments, and you're trying to put it all together and try to figure it out. And you're never going to figure out that entire, I mean, that experimentation, if I understand correctly, it was going on from 1944 to 1974 or something like that. So you're 30 years of experimenting on people, and and you only have like 100 pages of documents or something like that. It's like you really have nothing, when it really boils down to it.
Well, geez, I mean, my message was, my thought was something else, is that it's like, I have all these projects that I want to do in like these in-depth, like deep dive documentary style things. But the problem I run into is that there's so much information out there and so much to cover, that it just makes it difficult, because it's like, well, if I want to tell the whole story of the plutonium injection experiments with the Manhattan Project and the radiological weapons program, I'm going to be doing like a 10-part series where each episode is like an hour long.
Right.
And it's like, oh, I don't, when am I going to do that?
Yeah. Yeah, true. I mean, yeah, it's pretty incredible. Like it's just, I'm sitting here looking at a book right next to me, Operation Gladio, Yeah.
Yeah.
And how many documents and how much evidence is there for all that stuff that went on? And then you're dragging in, the Pope and the Catholic Church and, the mafia. And you're like, what the fuck am I reading here? Like, this is like, like a Dan Brown novel.
Yeah. Lifetimes of fuckery is what we're investigating.
Yes. It's like you only have so much time on your hands. Like every once in a while I get like this ambitious bone in my body, and I'm like, okay, I want to do an episode on this particular subject. And I start reading on that subject, and I'm like, there's no fucking way I can just do one episode on this subject. Like what you're saying. Like it goes and it goes and it goes. And we pick up so much information in the process that it's like sometimes we're doing podcasts and we're talking to people and we just mention something that it's just like, yeah, we know this, and we mention it, and then you have people like emailing you for like a month, like, what the fuck were you talking about? And it's like, oh shit, like, oh yeah, maybe I should tell you about Incompetence or something like that, because I've just been reading on this shit for fucking 5 years. Sometimes I just assume you know where I'm coming from.
Yeah. Or some people catch, the one half, like I just, when I was sick and laid up, I just released an episode about Ken Burns' Vietnam. That whole PBS documentary series. He came out.
Yes, I remember watching that. Yeah,
in 2017, and I was sick and I was watching it, and I was like, the first line that comes out of the whole thing is, well, Vietnam was started by good people who made fatal miscalculations. They had good intention.
Right.
I was like, what the fuck is this shit? Like,
well, my whole thing is it doesn't matter if they had good intentions. How the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Like, who gives a shit? The outcomes matter, right?
Well,
I mean, shouldn't the outcome matter to some degree? It's like,
well, I mean,
when I robbed that store, my child was starving. I had good intentions, so like you still robbed the store. Like when I murdered those 100 million people, like whatever.
but I mean, moreover, it's just though, like we have the Pentagon Papers that came out, like Gareth Porter talks about, like obviously this was premeditated and calculated, and they knew ahead of time what they were getting into. Right. They didn't give a shit, and then I don't know, so I did an episode on it. I just tried to put a bunch of stuff kind of out there, but it's like you look into who funded Ken Burns' Vietnam. The Koch brothers, the Bank of America, and like the Better Angel Society. And they had like the Department of Defense, they thanked first and foremost in the credits. And so you're just like sitting here looking like, okay, well, what other narrative am I going to get from this when it's like the Koch brothers, Bank of America, and then this organization called the Better Angel Society, which like the people that donate to that and the people who are on the board are like members of Citibank, and they're like directors of US Aid, which is like the United States regime change arm in like third world countries. And so it's just like, yeah, and they're talking about how, you know, there's so many perspectives of what went on in Vietnam. So there is no truth. We can't tell you what the truth of the conflict is because there's just so many people, you know, that have different ideas about what it means. It's not like, okay, well, let's tell the story of the absolute evil folly of this whole venture. And I mean, just the lives wasted, the civilians butchered.
Have you ever investigated the Koch brothers? Because I've never really looked into them much, but I have my questions about them because I get the opinion, I get the idea they're more of Buchananites than they are libertarian.
I've heard they're more lefty, that they're more cosmopolitan. I'm just thinking of like the Cato split, you know.
Well, no, because what I'm thinking of, all right, so in 2017, they fund the making of this documentary on Vietnam, right? But then, what is it? In 2018, they start the John Adams Foundation with what's his name? It was the foundation that was going after the AntiWar Foundation. Was it John Adams? God,
it is an anti-war foundation.
Yeah, they funded it with George Soros. It was the Koch brothers and George Soros, and it was an anti-war foundation. I remember Scott interviewing a guy about it.
Yeah, okay, I got a link for you here. Anti-war think tank backed by Soros, Koch launching.
Yes, that's it.
Leftist financier George Soros and conservative Charles Koch's new anti-interventionist think tank is set to open Wednesday, reports The Hill. The Quincy Institute.
Thank you.
Yeah, but we still have friends. I mean, we have.
The reason I draw the conclusion that they're Buchananites is because Buchanan was all about the war on communism, but after the collapse of the Soviet Union, he's like, okay, we can stop all that shit now. And I'm wondering if that's kind of their point of view.
I see. Well, I see what you mean. Yeah, like now the Soviet Union is gone. We can kind of, we don't have to be the world empire. It was
exactly
at that point in time, but now that Soviet, yeah. Well,
so I mean, Vietnam good, Iraq bad, you know, like that type deal.
Well, that made me confused because you know, I've told the story on the show, my show at least, of my grandpa was a John Bircher, and he wrote this op-ed against my grandpa did. He wrote an op-ed against Iraq Iraq War One, the Gulf War, and he said that us conservatives won't be tricked by Vietnam. You know, we won't be tricked like we were tricked in Vietnam. So I was wondering then, does that mean that it was common for John Birchers to regret the Vietnam War? Whereas Buchanan, and I don't think Buchanan is a Bircher per se, but he is a paleo, you know, and he was
definitely
still
a paleo. Yeah.
He was still hanging on to the Vietnam, you know, mission.
Yeah. I mean, he's as far as I know, he still holds on to the Cold War. He still holds on to Vietnam, still holds on to World War II, World War I, as far as I know, but he was definitely against all the Middle Eastern wars.
Yeah.
You know, and that's kind of what I was getting at with the Koch brothers. Like maybe it's like, okay, like all that fighting communism and totalitarianism was good. But now that we're fighting these, you know, goat farmers and, you know, bumfucked Afghanistan, that's not such a good fucking moral stand. That's all I can figure, you know. And, you know, I mean, you gotta you kind of, it's hard to do the same kind of gymnastics in your own head when you think of things so differently. It's like, okay, like I guess maybe I can kind of see where you're coming from, but it's just,
Well, I mean, I do know that we were talking about the Quincy Institute. You know, Responsible Statecraft is an outlet that's featured on antiwar.com, and they have good stuff. So, I mean, I guess I'm not universally condemning the Koch brothers. But I mean, there's definitely stuff there to criticize.
oh yeah, definitely. I mean, if it's not the Koch brothers, it's definitely Soros. One of them is funding,
Well, right.
what's happening, and I mean, now we got Bill Gates, that everybody's targeted on, but it doesn't take away from the things that the Kochs and Soros has been, involved in the past.
Yeah.
A lot of people are focused on Klaus Schwab as well. But, to me, it's hard for me to separate these people because they all run in the same circles. Okay, the Kochs are conservative billionaires. Well, one of them is. One of them's a dead conservative billionaire. But, George Soros is a progressive billionaire. There's really not much difference between the two if you really dig down into it. Neither of them are confined to a country like we are, right? Like maybe we could afford to go travel the world and see some things, but we could never afford for a country to just be like, yeah, you can live here anytime you want. You don't need a passport. You don't need a visa. You don't need nothing. You do whatever. You got the money to back it up. Neither of us can. And so they have that. So it's like it's a different type of conservative. It's a different type of progressive, and so like the defending of people like that, whereas I don't go around demonizing them. I'm not a communist. I'm not gonna be like, oh, the billionaire class. No, but
Right.
they don't have anything in common with us. They don't know the struggle of going day in and day out, going through life. They just don't have that, So, and I don't have the convenience of pointing out, dissenters to Nazis and having people I dislike killed. That was George Soros' life, like.
And as a libertarian trying to view like the robber baron era, there were certain people who's Thomas DiLorenzo comes to mind as one of these people that's Mises related, who came out with this book kind of defending the robber barons, because we walk this fine line, right? I mean, we know on the one hand that free exchange, like the joy of capitalism in terms of, the anarchy in the market, improving the standard of living, that the closer we are to a free market society, the better off everyone is. But at the same time, we also have the robber barons who, like, you can't deny, infiltrated different industries in the United States and cartelized them and created the government infrastructure to allow that to happen. So, what I'm trying to get at here is like, it's related to what you're saying in terms of like the Kochs and the Soroses of the world. But at the same time, we just have the situation where it's undeniable that the Rockefellers creating the American Medical Association and completely capturing medicine in the world it's a good thing, but it's a bad thing.
Yeah, it's done great things for the world, but that's how they sell it and keep that profit rolling into their, into their pockets,
Right.
and convince governments not to, trust bust, so to speak. I would completely agree with you had I not read The Progressive Era by Rothbard.
Yeah.
Like once I read that, I was like, fuck these people. It's just like the part just in the first chapter, like when he's talking about the railroads having the government confiscate the 18,000 acres from homesteaders and then selling it to the railroaders for half the price they were selling it back to the homeowners.
Yeah.
I was like, what the fuck is that? You know, like you're getting away with highway robbery here. And you're doing it because what? You're rich? You know, like no, like this is like that was like the first regulatory capture, right? Like that's where regulatory capture started. You know, really. I mean, well, maybe not started, but that's the first evidence I saw of it. I've seen of it. And I'm like, no, screw this. Like the ability to pay the government to regulate your opponents out of business really bugs me. That
Yeah.
I mean, it's like the whole like buying a business license.
Right.
Right? You know,
Yeah.
it's like, why do I have to get your permission to work? Like what the fuck is that?
Yeah.
You know, like
Because you don't own yourself.
right, you know, or it's like buying a fishing license. Like,
Yeah.
why do I need your permission to eat?
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck is this? And it's what so the big fish farmers can fucking make money at the grocery store selling fish instead of me going out and catching my own food. That makes no sense to me. Like it's so absurd to me. It just makes no sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
No, I'm
know?
right there with you, man. It's like well, and this I know we wanted to touch on eugenics too, because I just did this piece.
Well, I know it kind of feels like we're going all over the place, but actually all this shit is connected.
It is connected.
Yeah, it's like they start with these fucking crazy fucking experiments and then they just kind of ease it down and they're like, we take all the knowledge we've learned from the psychology that we've like done here and we weed it into the public mind.
Yeah.
And we kind of like just get in there with threads, right? And I mean, this same thing goes for the eugenics. Like you look at what's going on with the whole COVID vaccine, you know, right? This started with what what was that town where they did they were injecting the black guys,
Tuskegee.
Tuskegee, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it starts with that. And then it ends up like, oh, well, it's innocent. Like,
Right.
you can't sue. Like, OSHA is mandating that you take this vaccine, but you can't sue OSHA. You can't sue the doctor that administered the vaccine. You can't sue the vaccine manufacturers. Oh, and by the way, even though your company is adhering to OSHA regulations, you can't sue your company either. Like,
Right.
it's all on you. If something bad happens, it's all on you.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, go fuck yourself, man. You're not sticking that shit in me.
Here's another interesting like little tidbit is, so remember Buck Johnson had James Corbett on a few months ago to talk, like do an interview. And in the interview, James takes a shot at Tom Woods. Like he's clearly is taking a shot at Tom Woods. Do you remember this? Or?
I didn't hear the episode, so I can't speak to it. I have no idea what happened.
Oh, okay. So, well, for you and for the listeners, Buck Johnson had James Corbett on. I don't know. I've said on the podcast, like James Corbett is my major influence.
I love James Corbett.
Oh,
like,
he's
his documentaries on the oil tycoons, how big oil conquered the world.
Oh yeah.
And then how they've turned green and how everything's going green and just kind of following their lead. Yeah, like I love James Corbett.
The population control agenda is all in there too. But in like James took what I think was a pot shot at Tom Woods. Tom thought it was a pot shot at Tom. I don't know if James specifically intended it to be. I can't read people's minds.
Right.
But James was kind of basically saying that Tom appears to present all this information in just saying that our elites are incompetent fools and that they are idiots who just make no sense, and that what we need to do is show people a bunch of charts and that will make a difference in like defeating the COVID agenda. When and James used like rougher words than that, but he was saying like that's a childish position to hold, in that these like the elites are incredibly intelligent and they know exactly what they're doing and they're completely evil, and that this agenda is evil. And like some people at the end of the day would say like, well, does it really matter whether they're evil or incompetent? I personally think it's kind of a mix of both in some ways, but I tend to see James's point of view more. But what do you think? I mean, do you think it's evil or incompetence or a mixture, or do you think it doesn't matter?
I was a libertarian up until I started thinking it was evil, and then I became an agorist. So, yeah, no, I've shifted. I used to think it was incompetence. I did for a long time. And then you just start seeing things that are obvious. And it's like, if it's obvious to me, like, how do these people not see it? If you take the wars, for example, and you get all this blowback, right? And if somebody with my education and in my ability to research and finance, which is none, can come to the conclusion like, hey, the more you arm these groups, the more friction you're causing around the world, which causes more strife on the American people. And then you turn around and you act like 9/11 was a big surprise. Right. Like, no, I don't buy it. Like, I don't buy it. You just don't give a fuck. Yeah. You just don't fucking care. And if you're to a point that you don't care, like if you're in government, if you like, let's say you're a parent, all right, let's just take it down to the smallest common denominator, right? Let's say you're a parent and you know that if you go next door and you shoot your neighbor, his children are then going to be hunting down your children for the rest of their lives, and you do it anyway, then you're probably fucking evil because you don't give a shit. Right. You just don't fucking care. And I can say evil while they had evil. I'm not saying evil like they had like evil ends in mind. It's just they didn't care what the consequences to their actions were. They don't care. And so I can accept that as being, it's not incompetence, because you know that there's a major chance that this is going to happen. And so you're doing it anyways, then yes, you're evil. And you don't have any respect or love for the lives that are being affected by your actions. So yeah, I'd say that's purely evil. And it was understanding. Like I used to throw, I was talking about this the other day. I can't remember who I was talking to about it, but I was like, yeah, it was a big awakening for me when I realized they weren't just evil overseas and incompetent at home, that they were evil overseas and evil abroad. Yeah. Like that, like it was like, how are you justifying the idea? Where's this cognitive dissonance coming from that you believe that yes, everything they do over there in Yemen is evil, but all this shit with inflation and blah blah blah, that's just a mistake. They just don't understand. Yeah. And I've gotten past that. I'm like, no, they fucking know exactly what they're doing. Yeah. Well, that goes back. I mean, that goes back to the Vietnam thing. It's like, and then they try to cover up their tracks by coming up with Ken Burns and like sanitizing it by saying, oh, well, yes, like we all agree that Vietnam was a mistake, but it was started by good people with good intentions that made fatal miscalculations. Right. Like, or like Madeline. Oh yeah, what I was saying earlier wasn't an excuse of that. That's a completely absurd thing to say. Like, I'm not. I'm just saying, even if it was just oops, like okay, like we all know, like this whole like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That is not a new discovery. It's like thinking that we discovered germs in 2020. Right. Like. It's like, which is how people act. They act like, oh my God, this is the first virus that's ever hit. Right. Like it's like, what? Oh, that wasn't a shot or anything. Oh no, I didn't think it was. I'm just clarifying my position here. I was like, oh okay, well,
So I mean, but like take Madeleine Albright too, or we all remember 500,000.
We think the price is worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or I was watching this thing about, I never knew too much about Kosovo and the Serbs and like Yugoslavia and stuff like that. But Madeleine Albright was very involved with that process. And
really, I didn't know that.
Yeah, well, she God, who's the guy, the Serbian leader in that whole thing? I forget. But the United States and the UN supported the Kosovo Liberation Army, and
Right.
It was our support for the KLA and kind of encouragement that clearly escalated the conflict between the Serbs and Kosovo. And things like that. It's like her Russian counterpart tried to talk her down and be like, no, we shouldn't get involved with this. It's only going to make things worse. But they have the hubris to think that they can stick their noses in it and that somehow will de-escalate the situation or prevent, it's like, again, it's central planning, except for foreign policy. And so is that her hubris or her truly thinking that she can make a difference, or is she just fucking evil, man?
Well, how much of you've studied foreign policy more than me, so, and I know you haven't been looking at it lately, but I think you could take this broad question on pretty easily.
Sure.
How much of the foreign policy since, let's say, the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s, since Carter, how much of that was shaped by the Grand Chessboard by Zbigniew Brzezinski?
Well, it's my impression. I mean, that
it almost feels like all of it. It feels like it's like an exact blueprint for me. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm misreading it.
Well, it's like you can't deny the pedigree of the idea. I mean, it didn't. Although, of course, Zbigniew Brzezinski kind of popularized the idea. I'm sure that what he's really hearkening back to antiquity is my understanding. If you read Basevich talks about this idea, the Grand Chessboard, and I don't like these people get these grand narratives in their minds, and it seems like, is life imitating art, or is it vice versa? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. They get it in their mind, they stick with it, it goes around all the foreign policy elite, and they talk about it, and then they convince themselves that that's what's happening. It's like this return to great power competition narrative that we've moved to now. I think it's a dangerous self-fulfilling prophecy, because when you put in your mind, oh, well, the next century is going to be defined by strategic competition between the United States, Russia, and China. Well, what the hell do you think is going to happen if you frame all of your thinking around that concept? China exists and they have lots and lots of people, therefore we're going to be in competition with them for the next century.
So much of the focus of my podcast is to point out abuses of power and how bad things have gotten and the direction in which we're heading as a society. And it can be a real black pill. I've partnered up with Richard Grove to offer my listeners an opportunity to sign up to his Autonomy Course. The Autonomy Course is designed for people looking for solutions, people that want to shape their own future, people that are not willing to be at the behest of large corporations or the United States government or the banking system. The Autonomy Course is designed for those of you who wish to have complete control of the reins of your life, who are looking to be successful, to thrive and not just survive, to provide for your family by utilizing your existing skills and learning how to market and sell those skills in order to be your own boss, or learn new skills in order to leverage that into a new career opportunity. So if there's a job out there you've been trying to get or you've been wishing you could get, but you just don't have the skills for it, the Autonomy Course is the place for you to start, to learn how to land that position, to learn how to market yourself better, to gain confidence, and to be surrounded by a community of like-minded people that will encourage you and help you along the way. So use my affiliate links and go check out the Autonomy Course. It could be right for you.
Well, what makes it even more dangerous is, like, name one other time in history where world powers have been in competition at this much of with this much animosity towards each other, and the government is stoking a civil war at the same time.
Yeah.
Like, how is that supposed to turn out?
Right.
Like, you're trying. It's almost like it really does. And like, I don't like to go like, I'm paranoid, so I think about these things in my own time. I try not to spew them out on the air because it's like, oh yeah, you know, like, I'm just paranoid. I know I'm paranoid. I get it. I'm paranoid and I'm cynical, which makes for really depressing conversation at times. But but you're watching it, like, how can you think that what Joe Biden is doing and all the shit that's happening since he's been in office is an accident? Like, you're like, it to me, it's like you're intentionally stoking civil war and you're picking a fight with Russia and China. Okay, this isn't going to end well. How do we fight all these fronts at one time? You know,
on some level, I feel like, okay, so one note about I like to speculate on my show, but I've been trying to be careful with it and say I'm speculating and I don't have evidence to prove this necessarily.
right?
But I just want to speculating. It's like, I think that they stoke up all this division and tension, and it's like they're towing a line that they want to create a mess, but control the mess just enough so that they can use it to accomplish their objectives. You know, their objectives of creating a police state and creating, you know, like a global surveillance society and those kind of things. You want just the right amount of tension, not too much. And that's why it's so dangerous, is because, like, this great power competition could kick off at any second. You know, you get a hotshot pilot who accidentally presses the wrong button, or you get ships that collide with the submarine in the South China Sea, and then all of a sudden things kick off.
Yeah, but do you want to kick this off whenever 56% of the population thinks you're a total fucking failure? Like, you know, don't you want to have, like, some legitimate amount of backing, some support?
Maybe the thought is that I have to kick this off because I have no support. And then they will rally around me when there's a, you know, an external threat or something.
No, because nobody thinks that you're capable of doing it.
Yeah.
Like, it's just like everybody
That's
thinks
true.
you're a fucking total pussy and
Yeah.
you're a puppet. You're like, nobody believes that you're actually the one making the decisions here.
Yeah.
All right, so here's something I speculate on quite a bit. And, you know, was Trump towing the line, or was he for real? Like, was he a psyop, or was he the real deal?
I started to think last year, I remember saying this to my paralegal at the time when January 6th happened. And I remember saying that I think Trump is just, he's controlled opposition, man.
I've been saying that since he was elected.
So, yeah. And Corbett had an episode on this. We were talking about him. Precedent Trump, he called it. And he went through all the things that happened during Trump's period in office that was just business as usual. You know, and I guess that doesn't mean he's controlled opposition, but
there were some precedents set too.
Yeah.
Look at the amount of like, if you look at the amount of power the governors took. If you look at the amount of stimulus that was passed out, the amount of money that was printed. Yeah, like, there's, you know, prior to Trump, yeah, there was a lot of money being printed, and there were some stimulus packages thrown out there, but never in my lifetime have citizens of America been so dependent on the government. Yeah. Never. I never saw that kind of, like, on your knees groveling, begging the government to give you. Like, so there was that happened under the guise of conservatism, which is kind of funny because they always say that, you know, when you want progressive policies to pass, have a conservative do it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
You know, like you look at the most strict gun control laws came out of like Reagan, you know, like shit like that, you know? And so you would, you know, whereas everybody's afraid of Obama, nobody was afraid Trump was going to take their guns. Yet he passed red flag laws. He was like, hey, I say we take the guns and then we, you know, or however he said that. It was like, we take the guns first, then we prosecute or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Take the guns and then due process.
Yes. There you go. Due process. That was the word. Yeah. So it was like, it's like, yeah, like if you want to see how progressivism gets shoved down the American throat. And I was talking to Daniel Francisco the other day about how conservatives become the security branch of the progressive movement, you know, because it's their cops that they're defending that are upholding the progressives, you know, kind of policies. Well, what better way to subvert the conservative movement than have a conservative passing progressive policy?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's kind of like with the whole January 6th thing, it's like liberals hate cops unless it's the Capitol Police, you know?
Well, it's liberals hate cops unless they're punishing conservatives.
Right.
That's the gist of it, right?
Or the other thing,
they suddenly love the FBI now,
right?
Know?
Yeah.
And
we need to work with them.
But it's like I said earlier, you know, the same people that are saying that January 6th was all the conservative movement are the ones that will point to every terrorist plot and organized terrorist organization that's popped up since September 11th being a plot of the FBI. But for some reason, this one was real. This one, you know, or the Gretchen Whitmer, they still stand by that.
Yeah.
It's like,
I was going to say that.
Like, we know that was, 26 FBI agents or some shit like that involved in this shit. Like, it's
FBI foils FBI terrorist plot.
Yeah. But all right, so like we've kind of built up. Let's get into the eugenics part of this because I think that's like super. I haven't listened to your episode yet, but I've read a little bit on eugenics in the past. So I'd like to hear what you've uncovered whenever it comes into the eugenics side of things, because a lot of people, you know, like to point to Planned Parenthood and, you know, Hitler being influenced by Americans, yada, yada, yada. And this is why I have a hard time believing that things like Operation Mockingbird, Operation Bluebird, MK Ultra, I don't believe these things ended. I believed they shifted. I think they just shifted. You know, you just kind of evolved the operation into something else. So you take what you've gained and you just move it into another, you know, category. And it just keeps every 10 years or so, just keep shifting it over. And then, okay, we can give you these documents because they're from 50 years ago. Who fucking cares? Right. Has nothing to do with what we're doing today. But they've taken all that knowledge, everything that they've gathered and everything they've accumulated, and they've shifted it, which is why you end up with an Anderson Cooper in fucking the media, you know, because it's no longer Operation Mockingbird. It's Operation, this is how we operate, you know?
Right. Well, so you do video, right? This is
I don't, but
gotcha. This is the book I've been reading. It's called Illiberal
Reformers. Who's that by?
Thomas C. Leonard.
Okay.
So Illiberal Reformers by Thomas C. Leonard. Race, Eugenics, and American Economics in the Progressive Era is the subtitle. But when I was a kid, I would ride the bus to school. And when I was in middle school, and my daycare was kind of on this place too, but I grew up near a lake and we would drive around the lake. And on one end of the lake, this is in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, there was this facility. And I remember growing up my whole life, I went to middle school riding the bus and driving past this facility, and it was like a campus, and it had some old buildings on it. And I since moved away from there, and I always wondered like what the hell that facility was. And everyone would say, oh yeah, that's the colony. They would call it the colony. And when my parents were kids, and my grandpa actually worked at this place, he was a cook, I believe a cook. It came out later on that, oh, well, that's where the mentally disabled people are, and they're getting treatment there. And that was true. That was true at the time my parents were growing up. When I got older, I learned a bit more. I got into eugenics, learned about eugenics, got interested in the subject. Come to find out that this colony used to be called the Northern Wisconsin Center for the Developmentally Disabled. There was another name for it too, but I did some research on it. It was built in the late 1800s, and it was part of Wisconsin's eugenics program, where they would take the unfit imbeciles, they would call them, and they would send them to this Northern Center location in my hometown, and they would sterilize them, and they would keep them there for an average between like 5 to 10 years. And this was for like women who were caught at, they were prostitutes, or they were at a brothel with men. And there were also men who were sent there too. So they were sterilized, a lot of them, and they were kept there. They were sentenced to be there by like in due court proceedings. They were sentenced there, and they were given like job retraining and things like that. But ultimately they were sterilized. And so I did this episode talking about, in this book, it's actually.
And what year was this? Because I remember there was the whole sterilization program that was going on. I think was it like Indiana was like the last state to lift that program.
Indiana was the first one to institute the eugenics program, and their governor at the time.
That was in like the 20s, wasn't it?
I believe, the teens or the 20s.
Yeah, it was, yeah. But they were also like they were sterilizing people like with mental handicaps is basically what it was.
Yep.
And they had these crazy propaganda videos. I remember watching one, and it was this little girl, and they were gonna, no, it was a movie. That's what it was. It was an old 50s black and white movie. They were taking this girl away from her parents to sterilize her, and she was like, I don't want to be sterilized. And they were like, yeah, have you met your brother? Like, that's enough of your generation, like that's enough of your family lineage, like type of deal. It was, I can't remember the name of the movie. I think it was Thaddeus Russell actually wrote about it in Renegade History.
Oh, he did. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's where I found out about it. But anyway, so yeah, they were sterilizing the mentally handicapped, like people with Down syndrome and stuff like that, so that they wouldn't reproduce. And they had whole propaganda campaigns pushing it. And it was like Indiana, it was like doing this up until like the 70s and some shit like that.
Yeah, so it took place for a long ass time. And
yeah, it was like 50 years or something like that.
Indiana was the first in 1907 to create a sterilization law.
And that was way earlier than we thought.
Wisconsin was, I think, the 7th or 8th state to do so. But the thing with Wisconsin is that the University of Wisconsin, UW-Madison, we call it UW-Madison. It's in Madison. It was a hotbed, an intellectual home for these policies where they took root. And it was the president of UW-Madison who was behind it. A very famous also professor called Richard T. Ely was behind it, and he has a lot of quotes about it. But the thing about Wisconsin is that we're very German. And so you have like the Prussian system. Yes. It was like a conduit for the Prussian system and these ideas to come through, these progressive ideas about the administrative state.
Really? Because I thought that was like coming through Chicago.
It came through a few places, but Wisconsin was one of the biggest ones.
Huh. Okay. I would have never thought that, because like, what's the big city in Wisconsin? Like, you know,
Well,
like,
at one point in time, Milwaukee was a very big hub where you had a lot of brewers who were in Milwaukee and bringing those policies. But you know, Milwaukee and Chicago are pretty close. And yeah, you have UW-Madison. Madison's not a huge place, but it's where a lot of these ideas took like intellectual root.
yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, I've been to Madison, I've been to Milwaukee, you know, driving truck, and like they've never struck me as like hotbeds for,
No.
you know. So it's interesting. It's kind of like sneaking in the back door almost.
Yeah. No, it's eyebrow raising, and to think that things like this happened. I mean, they sterilized 1,800 people that we know of that are on some of the records that I found.
Yeah.
I had to be very careful though, because you know, I don't know when the sterilizations ended, but for sure during the 70s and 80s. Like, I mean, it's a legitimate institution now, and but this other thing, man, is these old buildings are sitting there empty. They're just sitting there.
Yeah.
Not all of them are being used. And I went there. You can drive up, and I took pictures of these buildings and stuff. It'd be cool to go inside.
Yeah, is it like, I wonder if it's like one of the United States most haunted places. You can go spend the night in there and see ghosts. And
It'd be interesting. Chippewa is very haunted. I mean, Chippewa has a very long old history. There's buildings around there that, you know, everyone talks about being haunted, like the Sheely House, but it's an old logging.
Dude, I'd go crash the night with you for sure. I'll do it.
Man.
I used to go ghost hunting when I was a kid. I'll do it again. That shit was fun.
I really hope that they don't demolish the buildings, because despite its history and also the fact that I don't want my taxpayer dollars going towards those buildings.
Turn it into a museum or something. I mean, you know, there's so much history there. You could do so much with it, you know, educate people.
Yeah.
You know, hopefully somebody, you know, with some money buys it and does something, you know, useful with it.
Yeah, they're just sitting there boarded up, man. I mean,
but again, here we are talking about a program that could have just shifted. Like it may not have ended. It may have just shifted, because now they are vaccinating people to end their ability to have children. And one could argue that the people going and getting vaccinated are mentally ill. So, I mean, they're still...
Yeah. Well, I mean, so you keyed on something there, like the shifting of the program, right? I mean, Corbett, he documents that in Big Oil, you shifting things from the eugenics movement, and now we're just repackaging it as environmentalism.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the thing is all these programs overlap. They all overlap in some way, shape, or form. If you look at, you're talking about, you know, the mentally ill there. Well, MK Ultra was dealing a lot with the mentally ill as well. They were doing a lot of things, you know, in these institutions. Do you know why they stopped these institutions? Were these institutions only in place to experiment on humans? And once they felt like they got the experimentation done, they no longer needed them? Why did they stop funding and keeping these institutions up and running?
I don't know, you know, and it's interesting because, like, we had the consensus after World War II that eugenics was a bad idea, right? I mean, and then all of a sudden that seems to be the reason, at least Corbett says in his documentary, why everybody, you know, became passé.
Yeah, but it took them 30 years.
Yeah.
Like it took them 30 years to stop, you know, sterilizing people.
The Supreme Court put their stamp on it in the Buck v. Bell case. And I can't remember when exactly that was. Have I talked about Buck v. Bell on your show or two?
No, but we are running close to out of time because I do have another show coming up.
Yeah. 1927. So the Supreme Court put their stamp of approval on Virginia's sterilization law. And so that was a big question in my episode, because there was someone that was writing their thesis, or a graduate student wrote a big featured article about this institution. And they were saying that it was like, okay, well, things fizzled out in the 60s. And then we're sitting around being like, why did we do this? Like, there's no follow-up studies on these people. There's no like report about how it prevented, all these violent criminals from running rampant or amok.
Right.
We didn't keep statistics about these people and their recidivism after they left. So it's just like, why the fuck did we do this?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's wild, man. When you look at the history, and again, like I said, there's just fragments, and you're trying to piece it together, and you're like, this doesn't make sense. But if I were like to end this off, I'm gonna give out a couple of book suggestions. I would The Poisoner in Chief, which is about Sidney Gottlieb. I would definitely suggest anybody interested in this stuff read that book. I have it on Audible. It's a great book. I really enjoyed that. The Devil's Chessboard, which was written by David Talbot, is a really, really good one. Brothers, about the Dulles brothers, is extremely good. So these guys during that period, man, whether you're talking about James Jesus Angleton and you want to read The Ghost, those people are just so interesting, and there's so much written about them. And is it Kinzer that wrote Poisoner in Chief?
Yeah.
Yeah, he does a lot of good work on the CIA and the stuff that they were doing. Kinzer, I've read like 3 of his books, and I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but he does some really good work. I really enjoy Stephen Kinzer, so I would definitely check out Poisoner in Chief. You got any suggestions on books?
Yeah, I talked about that Illiberal Reformers one, but there's the other one about the Manhattan Project that I can't remember the name of right now.
Yeah, we didn't even get into that, which we got to get it. I'm gonna have you back on so we can talk about that shit.
Yeah, I've been working on like an hour-long documentary. It's a multi-parter, but I can't seem to get number 1 finished because I was gonna finish it when my wife and kids are on vacation right now without me at her parents' house. I wasn't gonna finish it when they were gone, but I got sick, so it just
if it's not one thing, it's another.
Right. Yeah.
So, are you in the basement that you were rebuilding right now?
Yeah, this is my office.
God damn, dude, that looks fucking badass.
Oh, thanks.
I hadn't seen it since y'all were working on it. So
yeah. So I got the bookshelves up, and
yeah, that's killer, dude. It looks really great. Yeah. But hey, plug away, man, and let's jump off of here, and we're gonna have to do a part 2 for everybody that's listening.
Yeah, we will. Yeah. Well, good to see you, bud, and I hope you're planning on coming to Childerberg. I'd like to go.
You better go.
But libertyweekly.net is the website. You can catch me on, just search Liberty Weekly everywhere. You'll find me.
Yeah. All right. He's at the Institute, libertarianinstitute.org, and also on Twitter. So we'll get those links up. We'll make sure people find you.
Sounds great, man.
All right, brother. Well, I'm going to have to jump off here, but I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, for real. Good to see you, bud.
If you're gonna play this game of pick and choose, well, it's a game that was made for you to lose. It doesn't really matter how many times, it's the same old worn out stories, same old lines. They're all pointing dirty fingers in hypocrisy, bragging on their feats of mediocrity again. Never really making any kind of change, but they keep on getting re-elected, and I find that strange. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedoms. Yeah, I said fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that have taken our freedoms. What's it gonna take for you to see that we're living in a rigged democracy? People stand in line for the things that they've been choosing, paying no attention to the rights they keep on losing. But they all gather in the rallies and they chant their names on goddamn well that it's all gonna be the same. taxes. 4 more years of them grinding down their axes. And that's why I say fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that are taking our freedom. Yeah, fuck them, don't feed them, cause we don't even need them. I never celebrate the tyrants that are taking our freedom.